Hi guys, welcome back to Piscator UK. In this episode I'm going to talk about fishing lines, and in particular it's going to be a beginner's guide to the different types of fishing lines that is available to you. Now, fishing lines is probably the most talked about subject amongst anglers these days because there is so much to choose from and everyone has their opinion, but really what it all boils down to is personal preference on that type of fishing line, because some say that they only use specific lines for catching specific species, etc, etc, but it's not to say that you can't catch those species. They've just used a specific line that has enabled them to do it in a specific way, but again it is all personal preference. Now, there are three main types of fishing line available to you on the market. There are other lines, some specialised lines, but there's three main types. First one is mono or monofilament. Second one is fluoro or fluorocarbon, and the third one is braid. The first line I'm going to talk about is mono or monofilament. I'll try and use the word mono because it's a bit easier to say on camera. Monofilament revolutionised fishing when it first came on the scene. Before monofilament came on the scene, fishermen, whether it be commercial fishermen or recreational anglers and fishermen, were using natural products, natural fibre products, and when mono came on the scene, it offered them a big advantage. Natural fibre products, they rot over time, especially in seawater, and because mono is a man-made synthetic fibre, it's a plastic at the end of the day, obviously it doesn't degrade the same as a natural fibre, so that was a big advantage. Now obviously natural fibre products, they're not the same as a plastic, i.e. it's not clear. So when mono first came on the scene, it changed everything. Because it's almost invisible in the water, i.e. the fish can't see it that easily, they obviously started making things like fishing nets, gill nets out of mono, and they still make gill nets to this day out of monofilament. Transparent in the water, invisible to the fish, and obviously that saw a massive increase in catch rates to the commercial side. It was also similar to the recreational angler. Because it's clear, the angler could offer the bait or the lure or the fly on a line that was invisible to the fish, which obviously increased catch rates. So it changed everything when it first came on the scene. Obviously, since it first came on the scene, a lot of time has passed, and now obviously other lines are on the market, which we'll talk about later on. But the mono manufacturers have been trying their hardest to sort of stay ahead of the game, because anglers are looking for different qualities within the line. Now there are a few qualities within mono that anglers don't like, and one of them is its memory. Because it's a plastic and it's been on a spool, take it off the spool, you then put it on your fishing reel, and then when you cast out, that memory is still retained in the line, i.e. you can see the coils. Now obviously time has moved on since then, and the mono manufacturers are trying to come up with different products so that it has less memory, and one of them is this, called amnesia. Amnesia meaning obviously memory loss. And you can take this off the reel, you can stretch it out, and this is almost poker straight, and this is one of the popular lines that anglers still use. They tend not to use it for their main lines, but they'll use it for making their rigs, or they'll use it for their leaders on their lines when attaching it to another product. So they are coming up with different things all the time, and because these other products are on the market that are offering the angler these different qualities within the line, i.e. they're trying to make them harder, more abrasion resistant, and obviously being the memory in the line, they're trying their hardest to keep up with that. Now a lot of people have just discontinued with the mono. A lot of new anglers today, they don't even think about mono because not that many people are actually using mono, but it's still something that can be looked at. And one of the biggest things I would say that an angler would stick to mono is its price. Mono is the cheapest line on the market in terms of the other products that are out there, and you can fill up a spool on your reel for next to nothing. You can get the spools in obviously big capacities, and you can spool your reels up numerous times for next to nothing compared to the more expensive lines that are on the market. Now there are a few anglers that still use mono as their main line on their fishing reels, whether it be a fixed spool reel or a bait caster or something like that, or even a multiplier. I still use mono on one of my multipliers for beach fishing, and I would use it when there's not a lot of tide running, and I just don't want to put something that's really expensive on a fishing reel when I'm only maybe targeting flatties. I'm not trying to cast a million miles with it. So for a beginner, it's still something that should be considered, and obviously the price as well, especially when you're a beginner and you're just starting, is something to be considered. I use mono for some of my fixed spool reels when I'm maybe float fishing, really light breaking strain, and a lot of anglers still use mono for, say, some of their coarse fishing. So it's something to be considered. Shouldn't be totally discounted in using just because there aren't many others using it or showing that they're using it. Back to a disadvantage with the mono. One of the disadvantages with mono is, because of the other products that are on the market, is its diameter. Now there are products which I'll talk about which have a lower diameter, and that is why many anglers are going towards these other products, is purely because of its diameter. Because some of the lines are quite thick, especially when you start going up in the breaking strain, a lot of anglers are not liking the mono because there's line resistance in the water, whether you're fishing in a river or where you're fishing in the sea, and the tides are obviously having that resistance on your line. A lot of anglers are sort of staying away from it. It shouldn't be something that should be discounted from anglers. It has got its place, and it's something to be looked at, especially as a beginner, but again, it's personal preference. The second line I'm going to talk about is fluorocarbon. Fluorocarbon is much the same as mono. It is a synthetic man-made product. It's a plastic, but it offers the angler many advantages over mono. Fluorocarbon has not been on the fishing scene all that long, really, but the anglers are loving this. I like it, and it offers so much to the angler that mono doesn't. Some of the advantages are its memory. It's not got the same memory as mono. It's got less memory, so you can actually strain it out, almost poker straight, which is an advantage to some anglers. Fluorocarbon is very hard. Although it's a plastic, it's very hard, and it adds a lot more abrasion resistance, especially when fishing over rocks and reefs and all that sort of thing. You can give this line a good battering and it'll hold up longer than mono. Another advantage over mono is its diameter. I'll just give you a sort of for instance in its diameter compared to mono. You could get, say, a 10-pound breaking strain fluorocarbon line, and its diameter is maybe 0.3, for instance. You can get the same breaking strain mono line, 10 pound for instance, and its diameter is maybe 0.5, which can be a big difference. And in terms of resistance in the water, that is an advantage to an angler. Another advantage of fluorocarbon over mono is it's not as stretchy as mono, which gives greater bite detection to the angler. You know, especially over distance. If you're fishing over distance and there's not as much stretch that the mono has, then obviously you've got greater bite detection. And a lot of people will even use this over braid, for instance, as their main line. Now obviously you use fluorocarbon as your main line, it is really expensive. Fluorocarbon is far more expensive than many of the monos out there, even the ones that are improving and are meant to be premium monos. Fluorocarbon on average is more expensive than mono, and it's just something to be considered. It's not a downside to mono, but it is something that should be considered, especially when you're just starting. So that is the many advantages that fluorocarbon has over mono. Oh, and one last thing, on another advantage is many of the fluorocarbons, and in fact I would say all the fluorocarbons, are super clear, which makes them nigh on invisible when in the water, not only to the fish but anyone else that's trying to look for the line. It's very hard to see when it's in water because it's invisibility. So another advantage. So I think that's what, 4 advantages over mono, with the exception of price, and that is why many anglers use this. As I said, many anglers use this as their main line. Can be expensive, but I use this as a main line on, say, my BFS setup. You only need maybe 100 foot on your reel, so not that expensive. And the advantage of doing that is having your main line completely 100% fluorocarbon is there's no need for additional knots with the exception of what you tie your lure on to the line with, which an advantage is you've not got additional knots passing through the guides of your rod. So that's an advantage of using it 100% straight through main line. In most cases people use fluorocarbon as just a leader, which is maybe between 4 and twice the length of the rod, because they want the visibility, they want the abrasion resistance, and they want that little bit of stretch in the line, but not too much compared to what mono has. So I think I've covered everything in fluorocarbon and the reasons why anglers like it so much. So yeah, fluoro guys. Now the third and last line I'm going to talk about is braid. Again, it's been on the fishing scene for quite some time. Obviously not as long as mono, which has been around for nearly 100 years now, but it's been around a lot longer than, say, fluorocarbon. Braid is a man-made product. A lot of people don't think it's man-made, they think it's more a natural product, a natural fibre, but it's actually man-made. It's a polyethylene, and it's a woven product, i.e. there's more than one strand that makes up the braid. And I'll come on to what that actually means to the angler. Now, in most cases, there's 2 most popular numbers of strands within a line, and that is the 4 strand and the 8 strand. And that's usually depicted by the times 8 or times 4 for 4 strand, times 8 for 8 strand. Now there is other strands out there. There's 14 and 16, but these are the really premium braids that are out there. They're more compact, they're a lot harder, they're a lot smoother, and like I said, the most popular ones is the 4 and the 8. So 4 and 8, what does that actually mean to an angler? Well, 4 strands means it's only made up with 4 strands. 8 strands means it's made up with 8 strands, woven. The lower you go, the flatter the line. So a 4 strand is a lot flatter than, say, an 8 strand. 8 strands, obviously 8 strands woven together, makes the line a lot more compact, a lot smoother, and a lot rounder in profile than the 4 strand. Now again, it's all down to personal preference and what people like. People swear by 4-strand and people swear by 8-strand. My preference is 8-strand because I like the rounder profile compared to the flatter profile, say the 4-strand. When the line's on your reel, the 4-strand, because it's not totally round, it's a lot flatter in profile, it tends to cut in to the strands that's around it, or the coils that's around it. So this can jam up in your reel a lot easier. It can hinder casting, especially in the lighter lines, and that's one of the reasons why I prefer to use a more rounder profile in the 8-strand. Now going on to the advantages of braid over any other line. The biggest advantage of braid over any other line is its diameter. Braids are super fine lines, and that fineness just adds a massive advantage to anglers. Now just one point on the fineness of the line. Doesn't mean that strength of the line is compromised. Because the lines are so fine, you can actually go up in breaking strain and still be finer than, say, a lesser breaking strain mono or a lesser breaking strain fluorocarbon. And I'll just give you a for instance of fineness in a braid compared to a fluorocarbon. Now this is 16 pound 8-strand braid, and it is 0.14 millimeters. If you were to compare this to the diameter of an equivalent line in, say, a fluorocarbon, it would be around about 5 pound breaking strain. So I'm fishing a 16 pound breaking strain line, but with the fineness and diameter of, say, a 5 pound fluorocarbon. So the fineness of braid lines compared to any other lines out there is its diameter. And just because the line is super fine doesn't mean that the strength is compromised. So in terms of advantages to the angler, what does the diameter of the line actually mean to the angler? Well, if you're fishing a line that is super fine, it's going to give a lot more advantages to you. And one of them being is resistance in the water and resistance in the air. In most cases, because the line is super fine, you will be able to cast a lot further with a super fine line compared to a thicker line. Well, that is what braid offers, is less resistance through the air, less resistance in the water. Another advantage to the angler is braid has virtually no stretch, zero stretch to the line, which makes bite detection much easier. The line is super sensitive, so straight from your rod tip down to your lure, you can feel a bite in, you know, the heaviest the winds, etc. And that was really appealing to anglers, especially when you're fishing super light like BFS as well. You know, you're fishing ultralight lures and you've got that bite detection from the tip of your rod to your lure that you're actually fishing. So that is a big advantage, having that bite detection and sensitivity. Some people see the zero stretch as a disadvantage as well, because sometimes you need that stretch in the line, especially when you're fishing for species that, say, have softer mouths. And as soon as you hook into that fish and there's no resistance in your line, you know, you can pull the hook out its mouth, you can tear its lips, etc., because there is no resistance in the line. And some people find using it in certain situations a disadvantage, and most people will revert back to either fluorocarbon for those type of species or mono even to catch those species. Now, probably one of the disadvantages with fishing braid and being so super fine is a lot of anglers experience things like wind knots and backlashes on their reels because they're fishing something that is super fine, and a lot of care has got to be taken in how you fish braid, whether it's on a fixed spool reel or whether it's on a bait caster or a multiplier reel. And a lot of things that contribute to these wind knots and backlashes is the knots that they use in their leaders. Now, because the braid has not got much abrasion qualities to it, you know, it can just touch a rock and it will break. A lot of anglers have to use a rubbing leader or a shock leader, something like that, which protects the line. And also it adds a little bit of stretch in the line rather than, say, tying direct to a lure using the braid. So it can be a disadvantage fishing so fine a line on your reels, and it's finding the right balance and the right knots that you need to use in order to fish braid properly on your reel. Now, I just mentioned obviously that some anglers have problems getting wind knots, etc., and it's because of the knot they tie in the leader to braid. So the next knot I'm going to do, or the next video I'm going to do, is going to be the FG knot, which is one of the smallest diameter knots, which you need, especially when casting. So that's the 3 most popular lines that is available to anglers out there, and I hope I've explained the advantages and disadvantages of using each, but ultimately, like I said at the beginning, it all comes down to personal preference and what is suitable for your fishing that you do. Just one thing on all lines that you do use, doesn't matter whether it's mono or whether it's braid or fluorocarbon, these lines do need looking after, especially if you're fishing in salt water. And I would recommend that if you're fishing in salt water, when you come home, is give your lines a good rinse in some fresh water, and it will make the line last that little bit longer, as salt water will degrade your line a little bit quicker. So if you are a beginner, guys, I hope this video was useful to you. As usual, if you've got any comments, please leave your comments below, and if you enjoyed the video, please give a thumbs up, and if you're not already a subscriber, please consider subscribing. I'll see you next time, guys, on Piscator UK, and stay safe.